Welcome to Pathlight English, the channel where advanced learners build clear, natural, confident English. Today, we are learning how to express nuanced opinions and say, "it depends," in a more intelligent way.
Because honestly, there is nothing worse than being stuck in a room with someone who someone who speaks in absolute black and white certainties all the time, you know?
Or absolutely. Like, have you ever been trapped in a meeting with that person? The one who is aggressively certain about literally every point they make.
Right, yeah. And we're basically conditioned to think, that sounds confident. Like, society tells us that certainty equals leadership.
Yeah, but linguistically speaking, it's actually the opposite. Ultimate certainty is often a sign of cognitive limitation. So today, we're doing a deep dive into this fascinating leaked curriculum. It's designed for near-native C1 and C2 English speakers.
It's an incredible document. It's essentially a playbook for advanced communication.
It really is. And the core message of this whole guide is just brilliant. Okay, let's unpack this. The curriculum explicitly states, advanced speakers do not always sound certain. They sound precise about how certain they are.
What's fascinating here is the irony of it all. That fake aggressive certainty actually signals deep insecurity to anyone who is a trained listener.
Wait, really? Like it actually makes you look weak?
Oh, entirely. When we look at the source material we're unpacking today, it becomes so clear that the default mode of, absolute statements in a high-stakes environment, it's a defense mechanism.
Like putting up a shield.
Exactly. People hurl these massive declarations, things like remote work is destroying productivity or this policy is a total disaster. They do it because they lack the linguistic tools to navigate the gray areas. They feel vulnerable, so they overcompensate with volume and certainty.
That feeling of vulnerability is just so prevalent. You sit at a dinner party or in a boardroom, and the moment someone slams their hand on the table and declares an absolute, you can literally feel the room freeze.
The oxygen just leaves the room.
Yes, your blood pressure spikes.
Yeah.
You realize instantly that there is no room for an actual dialogue anymore. It's just a wall of absolute certainty.
Right.
But the document we have today is this amazing guide on how to dismantle that wall. It gives us 8 specific linguistic tools, 8 phrases that allow you to say, it depends, but in a highly intelligent, strategic, and, de-escalating way.
Which I think we can all agree is deeply necessary right now. We exist in this ecosystem of just extreme information overload.
Oh, it's exhausting.
It is. And if you look at social media algorithms or cable news networks or just highly polarized political environments, there is a systemic reward for the absolute statement.
The hot take.
Right, exactly, the hot take. The algorithm prioritizes outrage and absolute certainty because those things trigger immediate engagement. But reality, particularly in complex business or social dynamics, it's rarely binary.
Yeah, it's never just yes or no.
Never. So moving away from that simple certainty and toward precise nuance, it isn't just a matter of sounding more polite. It actively demonstrates higher intelligence and, frankly, significant emotional regulation.
Because you're not just reacting.
Right. When a speaker can articulate the gray areas, they signal to the room that they possess the cognitive capacity to hold multiple and often competing ideas in their mind at once. And they do it without perceiving those ideas as a personal threat.
Holding competing ideas without feeling threatened. That is the core of this entire deep dive right there. So we're going to explore how to practically execute that through these 8 phrases. And the progression of these tools in our source material is just incredibly logical.
It builds a really solid foundation.
Yeah, because you can't just jump into a nuanced debate about a complex topic if you aren't even speaking the same language, right?
Huh.
The starting point has to be calibrating the parameters.
Setting the ground rules.
Exactly. You can't argue about whether a movie is good if one person thinks good means high artistic merit, and the other person thinks it means it made $1 billion at the box office. So the first phase is laying that groundwork. And the very first tool our source provides is the phrase. It depends on how you define.
Right. So this is fundamentally an analytical framing tool. The source categorizes its register as perfect for interviews, academic debates, and, strategic business discussions.
It's very analytical.
Very. Its primary function is to highlight when an answer fundamentally shifts based on the semantic meaning of a key word.
Like how?
Well, the text uses the concept of success. So if a board member asks if a recent initiative was a success, the advanced speaker replies, it depends on how you define success.
Oh, okay.
If you mean immediate revenue generation, the answer is different than if we are talking about long-term brand positioning.
That makes total sense. We see this all the time in the ongoing war over remote work, right? A manager might ask, is remote work better? And if you just say yes or no, you've fallen into a trap.
You've lost the nuance.
Right. The advanced response is, it depends on how you define better. Are we talking about employee retention, or are we talking about real-time, spontaneous collaboration? But, and this is huge, the source material includes a massive warning here against using what it calls the naked it depends.
Oh, the naked it depends is a total communicative failure.
It's the worst.
It really is. If we look at the conversational psychology happening in that moment, the naked it depends is actively damaging to professional trust. Imagine you ask a colleague a critical question about a project timeline and they just shrug, look away, and say, well, it depends.
It's infuriating. When someone just says it depends and stops talking,
Yeah.
they're basically outsourcing the cognitive labor back to you. They're making you play a guessing game. Like they're forcing you to ask 5 follow-up questions just to figure out what variables they are secretly considering in their head.
Yeah.
It just makes them sound evasive or unprepared or even passive-aggressive.
You've hit on the exact mechanism there, the transfer of cognitive load. In a professional setting, a hallmark of competence is carrying the cognitive load for your audience.
Taking the burden off them.
Precisely. When you utilize the full phrase, when you say, it depends on how you define better, because if we optimize for speed, we lose quality, you instantly transform from an evasive roadblock into a collaborative problem solver.
You take them by the hand.
You do. You walk them through your analytical process. You are showing your work, like in math class.
I love that. And I want to build on that idea of the cognitive load because it directly connects to the second tool for laying this groundwork. It's not just about defining single words. Sometimes it's about untangling concepts that our brains naturally weld together.
Right.
The phrase the source gives us for this is, it is worth distinguishing between.
This one is identified as a vital tool for C1 and C2 level clarity. You deploy this when you need to separate 2 commonly confused ideas.
What's the example the text gives?
The text provides a classic one. It is worth distinguishing between confidence and arrogance. Or, if someone asks if being direct in an email is rude, the nuanced communicator replies, it is worth distinguishing between directness and disrespect.
But why do our brains even need this specific intervention? Like, why do we constantly mash these distinct concepts together in the first place?
Well, it comes down to evolutionary biology and cognitive heuristics.
Okay, getting scientific.
A little bit. So the human brain consumes roughly 20% of the body's caloric energy, despite being a tiny fraction of its weight. To survive, the brain evolved to be ruthlessly efficient.
Shortcuts.
Exactly. It relies heavily on heuristics, which are essentially mental filing cabinets that lump similar experiences together to save energy. So the brain naturally conflates directness and rudeness into a single file folder labeled uncomfortable interpersonal friction.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. It takes confidence and arrogance and shoves them into a folder labeled high self-regard. It actually takes active caloric energy to separate them out.
So when you use the phrase, it is worth distinguishing between, right? You're essentially acting as a cognitive speed bump for the other person.
Yes.
You are forcing their brain to snap out of that automatic energy-saving autopilot and actually engage the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for complex analytical thought. It's kind of like, think of it like separating the audio tracks on a mixing board.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
If you're listening to a song and the bass and the drums are muddy and bleeding into each other, it just sounds like noise, right?
Yeah.
This phrase is the producer sliding the faders, isolating the bass track from the drum track so you can actually hear what is being played.
That audio mixing analogy is highly accurate. You are clarifying the input, and this is a big, the curriculum offers a severe warning here. You must follow through.
You have to actually explain it.
You cannot just state the distinction and leave it hanging.
Right. If you just say, it is worth distinguishing between directness and disrespect, and then take a sip of your coffee and just stare at them, you sound incredibly condescending.
Highly arrogant.
You haven't actually done the work of separating the tracks. You've just announced that you know how to do it. You have to immediately explain the difference. Like, directness is about the clarity and efficiency of the message. Disrespect is about a fundamental lack of care for the recipient. You have to finish the thought.
Which requires preparation and a genuine grasp of the subject matter. And once you have established these parameters, once you have defined your terms and separated your conflated concepts, you inevitably reach the next phase of the discussion, Because even when you agree on the definitions, you rarely agree on the entire premise.
The absolute truth rarely sits perfectly on one extreme.
Exactly.
Which brings us to a really tricky transitional space in high-stakes conversations. Let's say someone pitches a fundamentally flawed strategy, but it contains one incredibly good data point. How do you acknowledge the valid data without endorsing the terrible strategy?
Right. How do you offer partial agreement without validating a bad premise?
Exactly. The source introduces a phrase that is heavily reliant on sequencing here, phrase number 2, to some extent.
The phrase, to some extent, is categorized as a neutral register, and it's utilized for balanced disagreement. It signals that a statement is partly true, but fundamentally incomplete. The source's example is, to some extent, I agree with the new policy, but I am not convinced it solves the underlying problem.
Now, you mentioned sequencing, and the critical warning in the text is that you must use this phrase before explaining the limit of your agreement. You have to front-load the agreement.
Yes, the order is everything.
You have to start the sentence with, to some extent, yes, rather than starting with your disagreement. Why is the chronological placement of those 3 words so vital?
Because it is a direct intervention against the amygdala hijack.
Okay, break that down for us.
When someone proposes an idea in a meeting, their ego and their social standing are temporarily attached to that idea. If your immediate response begins with a negative, if you start with, no but, or I disagree because, their brain processes that verbal rejection using the exact same neural pathways that process physical pain.
Wow. Literally physical pain.
Yes. Their amygdala, the threat detection center of the brain, flares up. Their physiological defensive shields raise instantly. Their heart rate might even elevate. Crucially, they stop listening to your logical counter-argument because their brain is entirely consumed with preparing a counterattack to protect their status.
So you're literally battling their biology if you start with a no.
Precisely the opposite is what you want. By front-loading the phrase, to some extent, yes, you bypass the amygdala entirely. You validate their contribution. You send a neurological signal that says, I hear you. You are a valued member of this tribe. There is merit to your thought process.
To keep the shields down.
You keep their defensive shields down. Once their nervous system is relaxed, you can introduce your caveat or your fundamental disagreement, and they will actually possess the neurological bandwidth to hear your logic.
Okay, hold on. I need to challenge this deeply.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because what you were describing, it borders on social engineering. Like, if I fundamentally think a colleague's plan is disastrous, maybe it's going to lose the company millions, but I only agree with a tiny 2% sliver of their idea.
Right.
If I start my sentence with, to some extent, yes, solely to lower their biological defenses so I can systematically destroy the other 98% of their plan, that is highly manipulative. I'm prioritizing my desired outcome over my honest reaction. I'm essentially hacking their nervous system to get my way.
That is a very sophisticated pushback, and the line between diplomacy and manipulation is famously thin.
Very thin.
But it is defined entirely by intent and truthfulness. If that 2% sliver of their idea possesses genuine merit, acknowledging it is not a lie. Manipulation requires deceit. If you find absolutely zero merit in their proposal, then using to some extent is indeed a manipulative falsehood, and astute colleagues will eventually detect that insincerity.
They'll feel like they're being played.
Exactly. However, advanced communication recognizes that it is exceedingly rare for an idea to be 100% devoid of merit. Even a disastrous plan usually targets a real vulnerability or stems from a valid market concern.
So you aren't manufacturing fake agreement. You are isolating the actual agreement.
Correct. When you say, to some extent, yes, targeting this demographic is the right move, but the budget allocation will bankrupt us, you are genuinely acknowledging the kernel of truth before addressing the fatal flaw. It is about finding the smallest sliver of common ground so you can stand on it together while you examine the abyss.
That's a great image.
It reduces the interpersonal friction required to solve the structural problem.
Okay, I can accept that distinction. It's choosing to focus the lens on the shared reality first, however small that reality is. And, speaking of lenses and focusing, the next tool in our source material deals with how we look at macro trends versus micro exceptions. The phrase is, broadly speaking.
Broadly speaking is ubiquitous in educated conversation and formal presentations. It denotes that a statement is generally true across a large sample size while conceding the existence of inevitable exceptions.
The example provided is, broadly speaking, technology has made communication faster, but not always deeper.
It is the ultimate tool for escaping the trap of the micro exception. Often when you state a general trend, such as, our supply chain has improved this quarter, someone will immediately try to invalidate your point by highlighting a single, isolated failure. Well, my package was late last Tuesday.
Right. The what about guy. What about this one specific edge case?
Yes, the what about guy.
It derails the entire conversation. Instead of a drone camera metaphor, think of, broadly speaking, like a data smoothing algorithm in statistics.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Well, imagine you are looking at a scatter plot of 1,000 data points charting customer satisfaction. Some dots are way up high, some dots are way down low. If you look at every single dot, it's just chaotic noise. The phrase, broadly speaking, is the trend line drawn straight through the middle of that chaos.
That's brilliant.
It acknowledges the overall direction of the macro trend without getting hijacked by the statistical outliers.
A data smoothing algorithm is the perfect conceptual model. It filters out the noise so the brain can process the trajectory. But the source material provides a rigorous boundary for this tool. You must never use it for a specific, granular claim.
Sticking with the algorithm metaphor, if a client asks you a specific granular question like, did my specific payment clear your bank at 9:00 a.m. yesterday? You cannot apply a data smoothing algorithm to that.
No, absolutely not.
You can't say, broadly speaking, yes, payments clear in the morning. That is a binary specific data point. If you use broadly speaking to answer a specific query, you instantly sound evasive. You sound like a politician dodging a debate question by pivoting to a generic campaign talking point.
Because you are mismatching the linguistic tool to the cognitive requirement of the moment. You are offering a macro trend when the listener requires a micro fact.
Exactly. So we have established our terms, and we have learned how to navigate partial agreements and macro trends. But this brings us to the most dangerous territory in any high-stakes interaction.
The pushback.
Right. What happens when the trend line is completely wrong? What happens when a colleague or client makes a statement that is not just slightly off, but fundamentally flawed? Yet the topic is too thorny for a blunt, "You're wrong." How do you offer pushback without triggering that amygdala hijack we discussed earlier?
This requires a significant shift in relational dynamics. The source material offers an incredibly elegant tool for diplomatic pushback. I would be cautious about saying,
I genuinely think this might be the most powerful phrase in the entire document. Its meaning is simply to avoid making an overly strong or reckless claim, and its register is described as diplomatic and thoughtful.
it's extremely effective.
The curriculum gives a very timely example. I would be cautious about saying that AI will replace teachers entirely.
Let's dissect the psychology of the word cautious in this context. Think about the standard response when someone makes a sweeping, radical claim like, traditional education is finished. If you respond with, you're wrong, or that's an absurd exaggeration, you have immediately positioned yourself as their adversary.
You're picking a fight.
You are standing across from them on the battlefield, engaging in a zero-sum game of egos.
And in professional environments, nobody likes to lose an ego battle publicly. They won't concede. They will just dig their heels in deeper and search for any evidence to prove they are right, even if they secretly know they are wrong.
Precisely. They become entrenched. But by deploying the phrase, I would be cautious about saying that, you completely bypass the battlefield. You alter your relational posture.
You switch sides.
Exactly. You magically transform from an adversary trying to defeat them into a wise, trusted advisor trying to protect them. You are signaling, I'm looking out for your reputation. I am trying to shield you from making a logical overextension that could embarrass you later.
Wow.
You invite them to step back from the ledge and join you in a place of prudence and safety. It is a masterclass in psychological de-escalation because it critiques the structural integrity of the statement without ever attacking the character of the speaker.
Critiquing the statement without attacking the speaker. That is the holy grail of conflict resolution right there. It reminds me of like a seasoned lawyer advising a fiery, impulsive client. I would be cautious about taking that deal. It sounds so grounded, so rooted in experience.
It does.
But the source includes a vital caveat. It notes that this phrase sounds highly evasive if you never actually provide your own view.
You cannot utilize this phrase merely to play defense. If your entire conversational contribution is repeatedly saying, I would be cautious about that, but you never offer an alternative perspective, you lose the mantle of the wise advisor.
You just become annoying.
You devolve into a perpetual cynic who merely pokes holes in the momentum of others. You must immediately follow the caution with your own nuanced interpretation.
Which perfectly tees up the next tool in our arsenal, Sometimes you push back not because the idea is entirely wrong, but because the issue itself is inherently labyrinthine. The phrase is, the answer is more nuanced than that.
The utility here is straightforward. The issue is far too complex for a binary, simple answer. It is highly natural in advanced C1-C2 level discourse. The example given is, the answer is more nuanced than that because the outcome depends heavily on regional culture, macroeconomic context, and the timing of the launch.
But I have a massive red flag regarding this specific phrase.
Okay, what is it?
The text warns, do not use this phrase to sound superior. It must be used to open a clearer explanation. And honestly, this is the trap. The word nuanced has been weaponized in modern discourse.
Oh, absolutely.
It has become this intellectual buzzword that people drop just to shut down a conversation. When someone says, well, it's actually highly nuanced, it often sounds incredibly arrogant, like they're saying, this is too complicated for your tiny brain to comprehend, so I'm not even going to bother explaining it. So how does a listener utilize this tool without sounding like an insufferable snob?
The weaponization of nuance is a very real phenomenon. It is often used as a shield for intellectual arrogance. The difference between sounding like a thoughtful expert and a condescending snob hinges on two critical behavioral cues: your vocal tone and your immediate evidentiary follow-through.
Let's break those down. First, the vocal tone. How does tone change the semantic meaning of the word?
If you deliver the phrase, the answer is more nuanced than that, with a heavy sigh, a subtle eye roll, or a cadence of exhaustion, you are broadcasting disdain.
Ugh, I can picture that perfectly.
Right. You are communicating your binary question is infantile, and I am burdened by the necessity of educating you. That is the arrogance you described. Conversely, if your tone is warm, engaging, and perhaps even intellectually energized, the answer is actually a bit more nuanced than that, and here's exactly why you aren't shutting the door.
You're opening it.
You are inviting them into a shared space of discovery. You are treating the complexity as a fascinating puzzle to solve together rather than a weapon to bludgeon them with.
It's the difference between gatekeeping knowledge and sharing knowledge. And what about the evidentiary follow-through?
If you simply declare that a topic is nuanced and wait for the other person to beg you for the explanation, you are engaging in a petty power dynamic. You are making them work for the information. To avoid arrogance, you must justify the use of the word instantly.
Put your money where your mouth is.
Exactly. You must immediately state the specific compounding factors that generate the complexity. As the source suggests, you say, the answer is more nuanced than that, because while the software works in beta, its success at scale depends entirely on the varying hardware capabilities of our global users. You have proven the complexity by citing the variables, rather than merely demanding they take your word for it.
So you have to earn the right to use the word nuance by immediately doing the intellectual heavy lifting to explain it. That makes perfect sense. But let's escalate the stakes even further. What happens when adding nuance isn't enough? What happens when a conversation isn't just lacking detail, but is actually moving aggressively in the wrong direction?
This requires moving beyond merely tweaking the parameters of the discussion. You have to change the fundamental paradigm. If the conversation is a game, you are no longer just altering your strategy. You are changing the board the game is being played on.
This is the realm of reframing, and the source provides the ultimate linguistic lever for this maneuver. Phrase number 8. I would frame it differently.
The function of this phrase is to fundamentally alter the way a question, issue, or crisis is understood by the group. Its register is reserved for high-level debates, critical interviews, and complex strategic negotiations.
Give us the example from the curriculum.
It's profoundly illustrative of its power. I would frame it differently. The question is not whether the sales team is lazy, but whether our current compensation system actually rewards the right behavior.
That example is a masterclass. Imagine being in a room where executives are going in circles, screaming about how the sales team lacks discipline and needs to be punished. They are trapped in a false binary. Are they lazy? Yes or no. If you engage with that premise, you will argue forever.
Because it is the wrong question, I would frame it differently, is arguably the most potent leadership tool in this entire curriculum. It is the antidote to conversational gridlock. Very often, a corporate team, or even a couple in a domestic dispute, will remain deadlocked in an intractable argument simply because they are trying to solve the wrong problem.
They're fighting the wrong war.
When you deploy this phrase, you step completely outside the boundaries of the current toxic argument, and you draw a new boundary. In the example, you shift the perspective away from an unprovable character flaw, laziness, and redirect the group's energy toward a tangible structural issue, the reward system.
It's literally like picking up a picture frame.
Huh?
If the frame is currently hung on the wall so that it only displays a pile of garbage in the corner of the room, everyone is going to stand around arguing about the garbage. Who left it there? Why does it smell? But if you take that frame off the wall and walk it over to a beautiful window overlooking a garden, suddenly everyone is talking about the sunlight and the trees.
That's a beautiful metaphor.
You dictate the focus. But the source has a massive warning attached. The new frame must be intensely concrete.
Yes. A vague reframe is worse than no reframe at all. You cannot say, I would frame it differently, let's look at this more holistically, or let's view this through a synergistic paradigm.
Oh, that empty corporate jargon.
It provides no new direction. Your new frame must specify the exact lens the group should adopt. I would frame it differently. Instead of looking at this through the lens of immediate quarterly profit, we need to look at it through the lens of 10-year customer lifetime value. It must be concrete, actionable, and mathematically or philosophically distinct from the old frame.
That kind of precision instantly commands respect. It establishes you as the person who can see the maze from above, rather than just being a rat trapped in it. And speaking of expanding the frame to see all possibilities, let's examine the final tool in the source material. Phrase number 5. There is a case to be made for.
This phrase signifies that there are reasonable, logical arguments supporting an idea, even if that idea is unpopular or counterintuitive. The register is advanced, deeply balanced, and highly persuasive. The source offers the example. There is a case to be made for implementing 4-day work weeks, particularly in our highly creative departments.
Now, the critical warning here states that using this phrase does not mean you fully agree with the idea. It simply means you are acknowledging that the argument has validity and deserves the room's attention. And here is where I have to push back hard, because I know our listeners have experienced the dark side of this.
The devil's advocate.
Yes, if you don't actually agree with an idea, but you bring it up anyway and say, well, there is a case to be made for doing the exact opposite of what we just decided, isn't this just playing devil's advocate? And let's be honest, the person who constantly plays devil's advocate in a meeting is universally despised.
They really are.
It feels like they are manufacturing friction just for the sake of hearing their own voice, completely wasting the team's time when a deadline is looming.
You are touching on a very raw nerve in organizational psychology. There is a profound structural difference between toxic devil's advocacy and the genuine strategic validation of a counterargument. Toxic devil's advocacy is almost entirely ego-driven.
It's all about them.
It is a pathology where an individual introduces a contrarian point purely to prove they are the smartest person in the room, or to derail the team's momentum because they thrive on chaos and attention. It lacks a productive, unifying goal.
Exactly. It's the guy who says, let me just play devil's advocate for a second, right when everyone has finally agreed, just so he can blow up the consensus.
However, utilizing the phrase, there's a case to be made for, in its advanced linguistic sense, is entirely different. It is a mechanism for intellectual honesty and critical risk mitigation. Consider the phenomenon of groupthink.
Right, when everyone just agrees to avoid conflict.
If you are in a strategic planning meeting and the entire executive team is aggressively, almost euphorically agreeing on a single risky path forward, the room has lost its objectivity. It is a leader's fiduciary responsibility to ensure that all bases are covered and all blind spots are eliminated.
Somebody has to pump the brakes.
By saying, before we commit all our capital, there's a case to be made for delaying this launch by a month to ensure the software is actually stable, you are not being a contrarian for the sake of ego. You are ensuring that a valid, potentially catastrophic risk is formally acknowledged and mathematically considered by the team. You are stress testing the consensus.
Okay, I see the distinction. Toxic devil's advocacy is about inflating the speaker's ego. Genuine validation is about protecting the safety and success of the project. It's about ensuring the team isn't blinding themselves to a valid alternative just because they are swept up in the excitement of a new idea. It functions as an essential red team exercise.
Precisely. It demonstrates that you are a comprehensive systems thinker, capable of anticipating failure points before they occur.
This has been an incredibly deep breakdown of the theoretical tools. But as we know, theory is useless without application. We're going to take these tools and see how they actively transform blunt, aggressive communication in real-time scenarios.
The practice section.
The source material includes this highly practical section that demonstrates how these linguistic upgrades instantly alter the perceived intelligence and authority of a speaker.
It is one thing to understand the semantic definitions of these phrases. It is entirely another to witness the physiological shift in a room when these upgrades are deployed in a high-conflict scenario.
Let's run through these scenarios. Think about the remote work debate we touched on earlier. Imagine we're in a highly tense executive meeting. The CEO has just mandated a full return to the office. The room is furious. If an executive slams their hand on the table and yells the blunt phrase, "Remote work is always better," what happens?
The entire room bristles, and the CEO immediately adopts a combative posture. The executive has declared an absolute statement that is mathematically impossible to defend.
You can't defend always.
You can't. The CEO can simply point to a single instance, perhaps one junior employee who suffered a mental health crisis due to isolation, or one project that missed a deadline due to poor asynchronous communication, and the executive's entire always argument is instantly destroyed. The executive loses all credibility.
But if they use the nuanced upgrade provided by the text, they say, broadly speaking, remote work offers flexibility, but it depends on the role, the team, and the communication culture.
The dynamic completely shifts. By saying, broadly speaking, they validate the general trend that employees desire flexibility, but by immediately conceding that it depends on the role in the team, they have inoculated themselves against the CEO's counterattack.
They've blocked the punch before it's even thrown.
Exactly. They have already acknowledged the variables. They have invited the CEO into a granular discussion about which specific roles require in-person collaboration, rather than engaging in a futile holy war over the overarching concept.
It takes the emotional temperature in the room from a boiling 100 degrees down to a rational, comfortable 70 degrees in a matter of seconds. Let's look at another highly volatile topic, AI.
Oh, this is a big one.
Imagine a school board meeting. Parents are panicking about ChatGPT. A parent storms the microphone and yells the blunt absolute, "AI will destroy education."
The result is absolute panic and reactionary policymaking. The board will likely respond by trying to ban laptops, policing students, and basically building a fortress against the technology.
But if a board member responds with a nuanced upgrade, I would be cautious about saying that. There is a case to be made that AI will change education rather than destroy it.
I love how these tools compound. You combine two distinct phrases there. I would be cautious, paired directly with there is a case to be made.
It felt very natural to put them together.
It is a highly sophisticated linguistic maneuver. You immediately de-escalate the panic with the protective posture of caution, and then you entirely reframe the trajectory of the anxiety. The blunt version incites fear and a defensive posture. The nuanced version invites collaboration and forward-thinking adaptation. It forces the school board to ask, how do we structurally adapt to this inevitable change? Instead of the impossible question, how do we fight this unstoppable technology?
It's the difference between wasting energy building a bunker versus using that energy to build a windmill. It harnesses the momentum. Finally, let's look at an interpersonal HR conflict. Two employees are clashing because one is incredibly harsh in their emails. I, acting as the blunt HR rep, say, being direct is rude.
And the employee who wrote the emails will instantly defend themselves. They will claim, I'm just a truth teller. I'm just an honest, efficient person. They feel you have attacked their core identity.
But if you use the nuance upgrade, it is worth distinguishing between directness and disrespect.
This one is just so elegant.
Isn't it? By distinguishing the terms, you solve the HR conflict without creating a secondary conflict. You validate their desire to be direct. You agree that directness is good and efficient, but you draw a firm, uncrossable boundary at disrespect. You provide them a psychological pathway to maintain their identity as a direct, honest person, while explicitly requiring them to alter their disrespectful behavior. It gives them a dignified way out.
It separates the behavior from the identity, which is the cornerstone of all effective conflict resolution.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, let's quickly retrace the architectural journey we've just been on. We started by learning how to lay a firm, unshakable foundation by defining our parameters using "it depends on how you define." We explored how to overcome our brain's lazy heuristics by separating muddy concepts with "it is worth distinguishing between."
We then navigated the treacherous waters of partial agreement, learning to bypass the amygdala hijack with, to some extent, and how to utilize a data smoothing algorithm for our speech with, broadly speaking.
We tackled the truly messy stuff, offering diplomatic pushback that protects egos with "I would be cautious about saying," and acknowledging reality without sounding snobby by proving that the answer is more nuanced than that. And finally, we learned how to completely shift the paradigm of a gridlock debate by declaring, I would frame it differently, and validating essential risk-mitigating alternatives with, there is a case to be made for.
All of which continually reinforces the core thesis of the curriculum. The true mark of advanced, highly intelligent communication is not the volume or aggression of your certainty, it is the exquisite precision of your certainty.
Precision over volume. That is the ultimate takeaway. Now, before we sign off, I know you always have a deeper structural concept ticking around in that analytical brain of yours. What is a final provocative thought for us to chew on today?
When reviewing all these phrases and the cognitive mechanisms behind them, it invariably connects to a much broader, deeply provocative question in the field of linguistics and cognitive science. It relates to the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which suggests that the structure of a language actively determines or greatly influences the modes of thought and behavior characteristic of the culture in which it is spoken.
The concept of linguistic relativity.
Yeah.
The idea that the words we use don't just describe our world, they actually build our world.
Exactly. If we apply that hypothesis to this curriculum, a fascinating question emerges. If you rigorously force yourself to stop using blunt, absolute statements, if you intentionally train yourself to utilize these C1-C2 nuanced phrases in your daily professional and personal life, do you physically rewire your neural pathways?
Wow, literally changing your brain.
Yes. By forcing your mouth to speak the words of a tolerant, critical, and empathetic thinker, do you eventually alter your brain chemistry to become one? In other words, are these phrases merely a polite, strategic mask we wear to survive corporate meetings, or does the daily practice of speaking cautiously and precisely actually mold you fundamentally into a more thoughtful, understanding, and highly evolved human being?
Wow. Does language make the mind, or does the mind make the language? If I speak like a diplomat long enough, do my neural pathways literally reorganize so that I become one in my heart? That is a profound question regarding neuroplasticity and the power of our words. I want you to ponder that as you go about your day. I challenge you. Try weaving just one of these 8 phrases into your next high-stakes, high-stress conversation. Watch what it does to the other person's defensive shields, but more importantly, see if it changes the way you feel internally. Remember how we started this deep dive? Talking about that terrible spiking blood pressure when you are trapped in a room full of aggressive, absolute statements? You don't have to be trapped anymore. You have the structural tools to dismantle the wall, open the door, and let the nuance in. If this lesson helped you, subscribe to Pathlight English so you do not miss the next videos in this advanced English series.